Hey there, today we're gonna take a look at this book, Bebop Licks for Guitar, and it's exactly what it promises. It's a book packed with bebop licks for guitar. So it says here it's over 800 licks in the style of Tal Farlow, Pat Martino, Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass. It's by Les Wise, and the way he organized all these licks are according to what kind of chord they fit over. For example, dominant, seventh ideas, 2-5-1 ideas. It's also organized after what note they're starting on. So if it's starting on the third or the fifth, which is going to help us later on when we try to connect these ideas. I always think it's a good idea to try to connect lines. So what I did, I've been playing through these licks the last couple of weeks, and I've marked down the ones that I like. If I like them even more, I maybe put down 2 marks. Then I'm gonna pick some of these and put them together over a little etude that I made over the tune Airegin by Sonny Rollins, which I think is a really good example of a tune, a bebop type tune, where you kind of need licks to be able to improvise over it. So, bebop licks for guitar over Airegin. Let's go. Alright, so let's take a look at some of these licks. So obviously, if there's 800 licks in this book, I can't really do it justice. I'm just gonna pick a few so you get an idea of what kind of licks we're talking about. So here's the first one. It's over a major 7 chord. Sounds like this. So it's actually not the entire lick from the book. I kind of cut it. I try to keep the licks a little bit shorter. So one of my arguments against the book would be that I think the licks are too long. I prefer shorter licks. That's something I got from studying with Scott Henderson. He always says that you should use short licks so that you can kind of, that makes it easier to change them around and manipulate them and so on. So you shouldn't just kind of memorize these licks as kind of finger movements, right? You still need to know the theory behind it. So here we're starting on the third, going down to the fifth, going up the scale, and so that I can kind of understand what these notes, how they relate to the chord and everything, because that also that means that you can change it, or you can maybe superimpose it over another chord and stuff like that. So it's important to kind of know theory as well, not just learning finger movements, as it were. So we also need minor 7 licks, right? So here's a few of those. And here's another one. You might think, well, there's nothing really, what's the big deal? There's nothing to it. Exactly, that's the point. They're very simple. But that's the good thing. Like, we need little things that we can throw in over these chord changes that we're gonna find in Airegin. So moving on, then we have licks that work over dominant chords. So a G7. I really love that thing. Now here's the thing, the licks we used over D minor also work over G7. Not always maybe, but more or less. So if I go back to those licks, works really great. And I think the other one as well. It could also be like a short 2-5, right? Like a D minor, G7. We also need a chord for an altered, a lick for an altered chord, C7 altered. So that's a very cliche and very obvious altered lick. Finally, we need a lick over a 2-5-1, a major 2-5-1 in C major here. Okay, so it's also very cliche. I'm going down the bop scale. And then last 4 notes are from the kind of the altered scale, right? So now we have a lick for each kind of chord situation we will find in Airegin. But before we get into that, there is this aspect I want to mention. I think it's important that if you decide to get this book and practice these licks, it's also important that at the same time, you should also listen to jazz and try to play along with solos. And it's not enough to just learn from like a book like that. You kind of need to transcribe solos and licks. And yeah, listening to jazz is very important. Listening to the guitar players that these licks are supposedly coming from, kind of, or in the style that they're coming from. Because one thing that this book is not explaining, or something that you won't learn from the book, is actually how to play these licks, right? It just shows you the notes. So that's basically what it says, right? But you might want to play it. You know, you want to add the kind of timing that a jazz musician has, the kind of phrasing, and that is not explained in this book or any book, because it's really hard to explain. The only way you can kind of get that is from listening and trying to imitating players. So that's just like a caveat. Don't forget that the most important thing is to listen and figure out how to play by imitating players. Now, still, this book is amazing. It's great to have books like this because it's a great source of information, right? But it should be used in combination with practicing other stuff and listening to jazz players. I think I've said it enough now. So these licks are written out as PDFs with tabs, as well as the little etude that I created over Airegin, and I'll put them on my Patreon page as always. So it's a good idea to come up with etudes like that based on licks that you're learning, right? I like to have all my licks books in the same kind of place, or any kind of material that I'm working on. So like I'll have like a little corner of licks, as it were. So the reason I picked this tune is because it has kind of bebop type progression. Like it goes 2-5-1 to C, and then 2-5-1 to B, and to B flat. So chromatic 2-5s, which is something that you can't or you don't find in if you're playing like American songbook type standards. This is more of a bebop thing. And if you're playing an American songbook standard, like But Not For Me or something like that, you know, you can kind of just play in the key and maybe hit a note here and there that is kind of from a secondary dominant or something. But when you have chord progressions like that, like this, it kind of doesn't work to just play in the key. You need something to kind of maneuver through those changes. Something that I've talked about before, for example, in my video on Moment's Notice. And if you want, you can go back to my video on Moment's Notice and find those little licks there and apply to this tune as well. So what I did, I took those licks that I just showed you, some of those licks I just showed you, and I transposed them and so that they will fit the chord progression of Airegin. But then I realized lately that when I'm making an etude like this, it's not a good idea to put a lick over every chord, because that's kind of, you want to leave something open for more free improv, because it makes it more fun to practice. So it's not out of laziness. I left the A section open, even though you could obviously put those licks, insert those licks there as well. But I prefer to leave that open, because then I can kind of jam there. And then the tricky part is this progression, right? Like the one I mentioned. So there I'm throwing in those licks. And the first lick is this one. And then I connected that with the major lick I showed you. And then the 2-5 lick I showed you. Sorry. And then the altered lick. Then I'm back to the A section. And then here again the lick. And then a minor 2-5-1 lick. Again the 2-5-1 lick. And the altered lick. So if I play this etude without a backing track and kind of rubato-ish, you will probably hear the changes, hopefully. Okay, I will play it over a backing track so that you can hear what it sounds like over a backing track too. All right, so I hope that makes sense. And imagine if there are 800 licks in this book, right? Like I just picked like 4 or 5 or whatever for this etude. How many etudes you can come up with? And the idea, I guess, is that if you do that, if you just practice all these licks over a tune like that, at some point you're gonna start to kind of internalize these licks and the language, and you're gonna be able to kind of change them around, and so that the goal is to not just play them in the beginning. You have to play them kind of like just insert the lick, right, as they exactly as they are written. But then you can kind of change them and maybe just play a few notes from a lick here and there. Another thing is that I did is that I sometimes there might be a note or a couple of notes that I don't like, so I'll just change it. I'll take a pencil and I'll just change it. So I don't see why you couldn't do that. Yeah, Bebop Licks for Guitar, another great book to get. So get it, and I shall see you next time.